So thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on the importance of by name lists in ending homelessness. The last time that we did a webinar like this was in the fall of 2019, and we did a by name list in Coordinated Access 101, but it seemed really timely to focus on this topic again of by name lists for a number of reasons. One is in December, Reaching Home released their community homelessness report, which asks Reaching Home designated communities to report on their progress with a by name list and to begin to report or prepare to report in the future outcome data from a by name list. Secondly, the Canadian Alliance released an updated by name list scorecard, the 3.0 version, in the fall of 2020. Thirdly is Reaching Home's requirement for designated communities to conduct a PIT count in 2021, which is also a great time to conduct a registry to either kick off a by name list or to strengthen an existing by name list. And finally, the fourth reason is the recent release of HIFIS version 59, which includes increased functionality to support a by name list in coordinated access, which we also want to further explore today with a couple of our guest presenters. My name is Marie Morrison. I am the Director of Built for Zero with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. And then also with us, we have Adam Anderson, who is a policy analyst with Reaching Home, currently working on the HIFIS team. So Adam has had a really key role in consulting, designing, and testing HIFIS version 59. He's also worked on the point in time count file and has participated in PIT counts and registry weeks across the country. He's been on the homelessness file with the federal government for 5 years. Prior to that, he worked with the Office of Disability Issues, where he worked on labor market opportunities for people with disabilities. Also with us is Ali Ryder, the owner and operator of Acre Consulting. She was working with Kingston, the city of Kingston, in 2015 when they were the first community in Canada to implement HIFIS 4. And for the past 7 years, as part of Acre Consulting, she's been working with communities across Canada to support them to implement HIFIS 4 as well. She offers all kinds of great training and resources, reports, and support, including the Acre Masterclass to walk communities from start to finish through the whole HIFIS 4 implementation process, and the HIFIS health check for communities who have implemented HIFIS 4 across their communities. So welcome to our presenters. So just doing a bit of an introduction now, and then we'll talk just briefly about what a by name list is, why you want one, and how to get started. And then I'll turn it over to Adam and Ali to walk us through some of the functionality and considerations in HIFIS 4 with version 59 related to by name lists. And we will have some time at the end for questions and answer. The webinar today is being brought to you from the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness, which leads a national movement of individuals, organizations, and communities working together to end homelessness in Canada, and includes the 5 key initiatives that you see listed here. This webinar is part of a series of monthly webinars and community practice calls brought to you through the Canadian Alliance that are taking place, have been since the fall of 2019 and into March of 2022. And the calendar up until April is now listed on the site. You can find all webinars and community practice calls, both those coming up and previous ones, on the CAEH Training and Technical Assistance website. By name list and coordinated access support for communities through the Canadian Alliance is funded in part by the Government of Canada through the CCI funding stream of Reaching Home. And just a little bit of housekeeping, today's webinar is being recorded and it will be sent out to all of those who registered in the next couple of days. And of course, we'll also be posting this on the website from the last slide that we looked at. Everyone is muted, but please use the chat and the question function throughout, and we will get to your questions at the end. What we are hoping that you will leave here with today is an understanding of a by name list, what it is and why you need one. And if you're familiar with it, again, maybe just picking up some terms and phrases that help you as you're trying to also educate others in your community about a by name list. How to get started, including looking at registry weeks, building on a coordinated access list and or HIFIS 4. And then to know where to find additional information and resources. So wanted to start with a quick poll though, just one multiple choice question to get a sense of what your current experience is with by name lists and kind of related activities. So I will just launch that poll now. And you should see that come up on the screen. Please check all that apply. Seeing lots of movement here. Got about half of the people who have answered. Oh, we're getting there. 2/3 of the folks have weighed in on the poll. Just give 30 more seconds. No, we're at 80%. All right, looks like we've got everyone here. We'll share the results. So I'm thinking that you folks are now seeing the results. So we've got some folks on the call are like, not quite sure what a by name list is. My community does not yet have a by name list. So we have one community who has implemented Registry Week. A number of folks that say they actively have a by name list. About 18% have implemented coordinated access. Some on the call who've actually gotten to a quality by name list. Got communities who have implemented or are planning to implement HIFIS 4, some with another HMIS system. So know that, you know, other HMIS systems can certainly support a by name list. We will be focusing on HIFIS today. We want to conduct a joint PIT registry. So we've got a few on the call there, and we want to conduct a separate registry in 2021. So that is wonderful. Thank you, everyone, for sharing. That helps understand kind of where everyone is at and what you're interested in. All right, so we're starting off with what is a by name list. And let's really start with the elevator description of a by name list, one that's easy to remember and quick to share. A by name list is a real-time list of all people experiencing homelessness in your community. But some people are like, well, what do you mean by all people? So there are some assumptions and qualifiers with that. The first is that they, of course, are known. You can't add people to a list if you don't know them or haven't come into contact with them. Typically, this happens through your homelessness response system like shelters, drop-in, outreach, coordinated access points, and through other community services that are participating in your by name list and coordinated access processes. The other is that they are consenting. You can, of course, only add people to a list or database if they have provided you consent in order to do that. Now, if your elevator ride is a little bit longer, you might have time for a little bit more information. So kind of that next level is that a by name list includes a robust set of data points that support coordinated access and prioritization at a household level, and an understanding of homelessness inflow and outflow at a system level. And that allows you to have real-time actionable data to support triage, to services, system performance evaluation improvement, and advocacy for the policies and resources necessary to end homelessness. Reaching Home also calls this a unique identifier list. So these two terms can be used interchangeably. Calling it a unique identifier list really recognizes that a by name list also includes a unique identifier for each person. This unique identifier allows you to further ensure deduplication of your data, but also an ability to use the list without sharing identifying information where it is not needed. So that, in a very little nutshell, is a bit of an understanding about what a by name list is. So let's talk a little bit more about why you would want or need one. Let's consider these questions. Are you required as part of receiving federal Reaching Home funding or simply interested in implementing coordinated access? So if you're a reaching home designated community, you are required to implement coordinated access by March of 2022, or for the 6 new designated communities by March of 2023. For monitoring and reporting on system level outcomes, so reaching home is going to be asking for information on these 5 outcome areas that I would imagine are also of interest to anyone in any community, whether you're reaching home designated or not. And are you required or interested in ending homelessness? If so, then you need a by name list. So communities that have reduced homelessness or ended homelessness have always identified that the by name list is a really key ingredient to that. So we can see some of the results from the US Built for Zero. They have over 80 communities participating. 82 have a quality by name list. 48 have had measurable reductions, and 14 communities in the US have ended veteran and or chronic homelessness. In Canada, we have 23 communities with a quality by name list, which includes ensuring for sure that that is true for those who are experiencing chronic homelessness. 5 communities have reduced chronic homelessness 10% or more and sustained that. And for a lot of those, that is, anywhere from 30 to 70% reductions. And 4 communities have also ensured that they have quality, reliable data for veterans and are well on their way in that area. So again, let's break this down a little bit more. That person-specific level data is important. We had identified previously that there's really these 2 levels of data. That first is the person-specific data, including a name, housing needs and preferences, and where you might be able to follow up with someone to offer them housing and support. And this data is used for coordinated access. You can think of a by name list as the crown jewel of your coordinated access system. The second is that system level data, the aggregate non-identifying information that you use from the by name list to count the total number of active homelessness, as well as inflow and outflow for identifying and measuring system improvements and progress to functional zero. And that is important. That person level data is important in order to deduplicate your aggregate system level data to operate an effective coordinated access system, to have a complete picture as best as you can know of who's out there and where to find them, to house people as quickly as possible based on your local priorities, and to quantify exactly what housing resources are going to be needed to end homelessness for each person in your community. And sometimes people get confused with the different terms used to describe how a by name list is used. Your by name list can be thought of as your master list from which you sort and filter for, on this diagram, level 3 coordinated access purposes based on who's eligible and interested in the housing resources you offer through coordinated access in your community. And from there can be further sorted and filtered to create a priority list. Shown here is level 4 to match people for any vacancies based on eligibility for that vacancy and any local priorities that you have developed. The level 1 aggregate list recognizes that you can pull aggregate non-identifying information from your by name list and count those who have not yet provided consent to share their information. So not different lists, all sort of different nested functions of that list. And that aggregate level data we just talked about is really that system level data, the anonymous roll-up of key data points from your by name list. And with reliable system level data, communities can understand where they're at relative to the goal of ending homelessness. They can allocate and advocate for resources based on real numbers, make projections or set meaningful reduction goals, have real-time visibility of their system and know what is or isn't working, and to get to functional zero and to be able to monitor that you're sustaining it and staying there. When we talk about this system level data that serves as an indicator for system functioning and really a support for your community to shift from being program focused to being system focused, we're talking about these 6 key initial by name list data points. We suggest that communities focus on 3 inflow data points: newly identified, returned from housing, and returned from inactive, total active homelessness, and 2 outflow points, housing move-ins and move to inactive. And again, when you're getting started, sometimes just getting your whole community to count together the number of housing move-ins you have is a great start. And if you're looking for further details, have added in a link there for some more information on those 6 data points. And then looking at these data points each month, you can understand your progress in ending homelessness and whether it's going up or down in real time, rather than relying on an annual snapshot of your data that really immediately becomes out of date. And you can look at what's going on behind those numbers in terms of inflow and outflow each month to better understand where to focus your efforts. Homelessness is dynamic, so your data capture and analysis needs to be responsive to that reality. And a video is really the best way to display that dynamic story. So this 4-minute video can be used to help you and others in your community understand a by name list and how it can be used to end homelessness. We are not going to watch it now, but I've included the link so that you can watch it later. And we really believe that the by name list is the first step on the pathway to ending homelessness. That really informs and supports coordinated access and system improvements to help you drive and monitor monthly reductions to home stretch and functional zero on specific populations that you can then work to sustain while taking what you've learned and apply it to new populations. So in summary, the benefits of a by name list, again, if you're looking to share this with your community and grab like, what are those benefits? You're looking at smarter triage, you're looking at improved systems and resource advocacy to really ground your advocacy efforts in concrete data. And I've also linked in a blog that does a really nice job of explaining the power of real-time data. So for those of you who are reaching home designated communities, you will be asked to report on your total active homeless and inflow outflow data on an annual basis for overall homelessness, chronic homelessness, and Indigenous homelessness. And you will, of course, need a by name list to be able to do that. But your data will not be reliable unless you have a quality by name list. So what does that look like? What do we mean by a quality by name list? So a quality by name list has full coverage of all agencies and programs being represented. It includes people sleeping in shelters, who are unsheltered, who are provisionally accommodated. It includes families, youth, and single adults. It is updated in real time. So when we say real time, we mean monthly at a minimum. Ideally, your data is as real time as you can possibly make it, but definitely monthly at a minimum. As people's housing status changes, so as they become housed or homeless, or you lose touch with them and they become inactive, these changes are reflected in your data. That each person's entry includes their name, their history, some housing history, health needs, and can be followed through the system, ensure that they get the support they need. And that your data balances month over month, really like you would expect your bank account to. So money flows into your bank account and out of your bank account, and hopefully you should be able to go in at any time and know how much money is left in your bank. So reaching home in terms of the requirements, they're going to be asking, do you have a list? And they have identified 4 minimum things that they would say are indicators that you have a by name list in place. The first is that you have unduplicated information for each individual or household, and that is contained in one document or database. So not a bunch of different ones that you kind of mash up the aggregate data, that all of those names, unique identifiers, are in one document database, and that it includes people who are actively experiencing homelessness, and those are the numbers you're pulling from, and that people have given consent to be on that list. And again, have linked in sort of resources and further information there. They're also going to be asking some information about the comprehensiveness of that by name list. And again, I've left the link there, but All of those elements, plus some additional ones, are also part of the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness by Name List Scorecard. And that scorecard has 11 questions, different points to kind of support folks along in their journey of developing a by name list. So some basic ones, sort of the first ones you're going to focus on is out of 10. There's an additional 4 elements that if you're looking to get quality data for veterans that you're going to consider. And then really your data is always about continuous improvement. So there's advanced quality elements for you to keep working on improving and adding to that by name list. The by name list scorecard is on the Built for Zero website. You can see it linked there. It's actually part of a document that has a number of tabs, which also include the coordinated access scorecard and the provider participation tool. In that document, as well as outside of that document, there is a guide. So in the document, as you're going through each question, you can link immediately to the part of the guide that it applies to, but in there is further information about those questions, what they mean, tips and resources that are available to you. And that scorecard is really meant to be a self-assessment tool to help kind of guide your community in thinking about all of those quality elements. So how to get started with a by name list. We've identified sort of 10 steps to help create and use a by name list. This is just sort of to give you that quick roadmap. Sometimes they're not always consecutive, some of them are not always in this particular order, some of them might be happening consecutively. It's also going to depend a little bit on what's already happening in your community and the approach that you want to take. But the first step is really to learn about a by name list. What is it all about? Understand it. That is what you're doing now. The next is to clarify your scope. So what geographic area are you trying to capture with your by name list? Are you going to kind of shrink the change and start smaller with perhaps a subpopulation and then work on building up your by name list over time? And then building the community will, again, depending on what your focus is, who do you need to bring to the table to work on your by name list? You're going to pick your tools. So you need some kind of a database to hold the information in and someone to host that database, and some questions that you commonly ask across the community so that you've got common information in that database. It may also be an assessment. You're going to identify some kind of a kick-off approach and kind of prepare for that. So a registry week might be one, so sort of a blitz to add as many people to the list and sort of kickstart it and get it going. Some people already have coordinated access or a priority list and they're looking to build that up further and work on those quality elements. Some people may have, and again, be planning to have HIFIS 4 or another HMIS, of which you've got a bunch of names and information in. And again, you're thinking about how to build in some further quality elements and make sure you can get those key system level data points out. You're going to need a common consent. So a consent that is used across your community that asks permission to share that information on the list and with other key providers that are working to house folks. And then any other privacy consent and data sharing approaches that you're going to need based on how you're managing this data and storing it. So it's really ideal as you're starting a by name list to set a goal. Like, we're adding people to this list because we want to, by July of this year, we want to house 40 people or something like that. So this idea that you're not just adding people to a list for the sake of adding them to the list. You want to inventory and gather housing resources that you can offer to folks from your list. And again, this speaks to the connection between by name list and coordinated access. You're going to want to set policies and processes to manage your by name list and coordinated access. And then to implement your coordinated access prioritization, matching, and referral. So again, you can see these things are all interlinked, and it's really about not having it perfect, but about getting started. You're going to keep evolving and developing your processes over time. You're going to need to continually update your policies. So, I mean, this is definitely an ongoing work in progress. You're going to continue to take the by name list scorecard. We really encourage people to keep taking it, and not just one person, like bring your key stakeholders together to look at those elements and come together at least quarterly to look at your progress on building those elements in. And then achieving equality by name list, so kind of getting to that point, again, recognizing that it is a continuous improvement effort. But once you have sort of that basic quality of a by name list, that is when you're really going to be able to dig into and use that system level data to understand and improve your system. So you may be asking, like, how do I do that? That's a lot. Where do I find help and information for that? There is a by name list toolkit on the Built for Zero website, and it has drop downs that include lots of information about what is a by name list, the 10 steps that we just talked about, the scorecard and tools that we talked about. There is information and community examples on privacy, consent, and data sharing. There's links and information to help connect you up with homeless individual and family information system information. If you are getting started, don't have an HMIS, haven't yet fully implemented an HMIS and whatnot, you can definitely do this in Excel, and that is the way lots of communities get started as well. As more and more, HIFIS is coming into play, or other HMIS is coming into play for communities. But there's a sample Excel workbook there with a guide that will help you, rather than having to set up a spreadsheet and start from scratch. There's all the elements that you need there for a quality by name list. There's some sample data dashboards to show you what communities are doing with their data. And then we talk about how coordinated access connects, and it connects you with the coordinated access toolkit page, where again, there's lots of community examples where they have developed, entire guides with all their policies and procedures and one pagers and videos and things to explain and capture what they're doing around a by name list and coordinated access. So definitely communities do not need to start from scratch. I did want to just mention Registry Week and point in time counts. So folks, if you're a designated community, you would have heard the expectation to conduct a 2021 PIT count, of course, with additional health measures and flexibility. But these really are such a great time. If you're going to be out in some way trying to gather information and connect with people for a PIT count, it's a great time to kickstart or strengthen your by name list with a registry. And of course, during COVID, you're not going to do the whole event with volunteers and like more surveys and that type of thing. You're really trying to limit that content, and the time and whatnot. So really, if you boil it down, it's just 3 essential elements. You're going to need to have a common consent so that you can ask for people's names. You're going to ask a few additional questions that make the most sense in your community so that you can, when you add folks to the list, you can follow up with housing and support. So if you're using HIFIS, that's the basic HIFIS data entry questions. Or it could include things like date of birth, gender, length of time homeless, that sort of thing. And when you include that information on your by name list, you're also going to want to make sure you have a plan for keeping it updated, again, at least monthly. And then folks usually work overtime to even make that more real time. So if you're considering that, we're certainly here to offer support. You can connect with me. We also have a whole Registry Week toolkit with further information and resources on it. So we now want to talk a little bit more about HIFIS 4, the new version, and how it can support a by name list. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Adam, who then, after he's done, we'll turn it over to Ali, and then we'll have some time for questions. So Adam, take it away.
Thanks, Marie. So hi, everyone. So my name is Adam Anderson. As Marie mentioned at the beginning, I work specifically on the team called the HIFIS Partnerships team, but within Reaching Home, ESDC. So I'm going to chat a bit about our latest version of HIFIS, version 59. And just if we go to the next slide. Before I start, a quick thank you to all those who helped with the current version of HIFIS. So our national HIFIS working group, CAEH, and all of you Built for Zero communities, Acre Consulting, and of course we couldn't have developed any of this without our HIFIS developers, So big kudos to you guys as well. Before I jump into what's in version 59, I just thought it would be a good opportunity to take a second to give my version of the elevator pitch. I will say, Marie, my elevator in my building is a little slow, so mine might be a little longer. But to start, what is HIFIS? So HIFIS is the Homeless Individuals and Families Information System, HIFIS for short. Is a comprehensive data collection and case management system designed to better understand what is happening in communities and to support working collaboratively. So in terms of data collection, HIFIS can capture up to 2,000 data fields, of which 38 of them are shared with ESDC in exchange for using HIFIS. And these 2,000 data fields that you can collect can be on demographic information, service planning details, housing history, housing placements, case management transactions. So there is a whole, so there's a lot of things that HIFIS can collect. So HIFIS is designed to support, oh, go back one more.
Sorry.
HIFIS is designed to support coordinated access by allowing multiple service providers from the same community to access real-time information through a community-wide system available via web-enabled devices such as smartphones, laptops, tablets. So HIFIS sits on server on the cloud that is hosted by a HIFIS lead in a community, and access is provided that way. And just as a reminder for reaching home communities, they must adopt HIFIS if they do not already have a comparable homelessness management information system in place. And then more tangibly, next slide, what does that mean? So this by no means is an exhaustive list, but HIFIS can show you who is homeless in real time every day. HIFIS can track a person's changes in housing status over time, so from homeless to housed, vice versa. This includes unsheltered experiences or hidden homelessness, and captures the experience of homelessness beyond shelter intake. So historically, we probably would have thought of HIFIS as a very good admissions tool, but it does do things beyond admissions. So outreach, case management, housing placements, and more. And now the ability to create a unique identifier list and prioritize clients. So why was this, why was version 59.1 developed? So for reaching home, we see this as our first step towards moving HIFIS to be that comprehensive coordinated access and homelessness management information system. These enhancements make the information in HIFIS much more accessible. And we've also introduced some of the, what I call the plumbing in HIFIS to be able to allow communities to report on the community homelessness report, as Marie mentioned earlier. So that's an annual homeless report that describes communities' cumulative level of homelessness. So if you're familiar with the coordinated access, the Reaching Home Coordinated Access Guide, the graphic on the right there won't be any surprise to you. So what this latest version of HIFIS focuses on is sections 2 and 3. Apologies, it may be a little small, but that's access and prioritization. And future versions of HIFIS will focus on that 4th section, which is vacancy matching and referral. And why was this version developed for communities? So to help you gain a better understanding of who's experiencing homelessness in your community, to help clients access the appropriate services through general community referrals, to prioritize clients for resources in your coordinated access resource inventory, better understand inflow and outflow, and to use the information on the list to show what services are in demand and what might be needed. So what's new in version 59.1? So several new functionalities to help communities become increasingly data-driven. The first one that I'll highlight is the ability to identify individuals who are experiencing chronic homelessness. So this uses the federal definition of chronic homelessness in a new feature we called the client housing status feature. So essentially on every client's profile, it will display the client as being housed, as being homeless, as being chronically homeless, being transitional, or unknown. So this is, so unknown essentially is you don't know where the client is. And the other ones correspond with, if you're familiar with HIFIS, the housing continuum, where each housing type is assigned with a specific housing status. And that now appears on the client file. And then the next one there, identifying clients that are active or inactive based on a community's local inactivity policy. So if you're familiar with the Built for Zero process, or even this by name list process, you'll be familiar with a term called the inactivity policy, whereas a client after a certain amount of time becomes inactive. And now that feature exists in HIFIS, where the HIFIS administrator or whomever sets a time parameter that says after 90 days or after 120 days, this client's file will go inactive because the client hasn't received any transactions in the past, insert the number of days, 90 days, 120 days. And then the next one there is coordinated access consent. So we acknowledge that some communities have multiple levels of consent in their coordinated access process. So they might have a consent for HIFIS specifically, a consent to share information in HIFIS, but then they might also have another layer of consent that is consent to receive housing resources. So we've built in that flexibility in HIFIS for communities with multiple levels of consent. However, there is also the option to bundle those consents so that they don't have to add two versions of a consent, you just add sort of one bundled consent. And then the last one is generating a unique identifier list directly in HIFIS. So using the conditions that we've sort of pre-established with the items I mentioned before. So a client is homeless, the client is active, and the client has provided coordinated access consent. There's now a module in HIFIS that pools all of those clients who meet those conditions and puts them in a specific module and then displays those clients. And then within that list of clients, you have the ability to apply filters to do some basic prioritization, whether that's filtering for clients who are veterans, indigenous, based on age, and various sort of other characteristics. And so how to get the most out of version 59.1. I'll only pick on a few of these, other than to say that this version of HIFIS is meant to encourage encourage communities to move towards that data-driven approach to realize sort of the full potential of the things that HIFIS can do and the things that you can do with data. So supporting high quality data, which is essentially around encouraging the documentation of data management best practices through local policies and protocols. So what fields of data are mandatory, how data fields are defined, and how data can or should be input in HIFIS. Making data real time, so that just speaks to the need for timely data entry, monitoring high quality data, monitoring data quality, so that's just essentially having some type of validation process to find anomalies, and then completing key fields in HIFIS. You'll see that if you play around with this latest version of HIFIS, there's a greater importance on housing history, which is used to support coordinated access and the CHR. And just as a few reminders, so if you're not familiar with HIFIS, so we have our HIFIS demo site that you can play around with, so demo.hifis.ca. It has this latest version. We also have a complimentary reference guide for this version of HIFIS, which goes over in much more detail than I just provided, all of the things that we updated in HIFIS. Also an FAQ, the release notes. We have our HIFIS Client Support Center, who's always available to support all of our HIFIS communities and those interested in HIFIS. So by all means, you can reach out to them at support@hifis.ca. We also have a HIFIS newsletter. So if you want to get signed up for that, email info@hifis.ca. All of our resources are available on the Homeless Learning Hub, which is linked there. And a quick note about what's coming. So we do have a subsequent version of HIFIS, I'll call it 59.2, which is updates to the PIT count module. So if you're going to be using HIFIS for your PIT count, the 59.2 version includes updates to the questions, and that'll be released in a few weeks, so that you can use it for your subsequent spring PIT count. If you are a non-HIFIS using community, you can also reach out to talk to us about HIFIS Lite. So if you are doing a PIT count and need HIFIS for your data collection, we have a version of HIFIS that is just the PIT count module called HIFIS Lite. So that'll help support your data collection for your spring PIT count, but it does only include the PIT count module. By all means, reach out to support@hifis.ca. We can provide further details on that. And I think the next slide was just a link to a webinar walkthrough that we did. So this is specific to show off 59.1. It will be updated on the hub, but in the meantime, you're welcome to take a look at our walkthrough through that link there. And I think that's it for me.
That is amazing. Thank you for sharing all that, providing all those resources. And again, I know there's a number of communities on the phone who are not using HIFIS and are maybe not designated communities. And I heard you say, Adam, that they can reach out to the Client Support Center to inquire about HIFIS.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Wonderful. All right. So Ali, we wanted you to kind of provide a non-reaching home outside look on this new version, and just for you to highlight what you see is really being helpful in supporting the work of a by name list, and some things that maybe communities should be aware of.
All right. Thanks, Marie. So my name is Ali Ryder with Acre Consulting, and what I do a lot of is just work with communities that are using HIFIS or intending to use HIFIS. And so what I have to say about HIFIS version 59 is, yay, we did it. Next slide, please. So why am I celebrating? Well, several years ago, it feels like not that long ago, but then it's 2021 and, you know. So a few years ago, the Built for Zero Canada campaign, which was at the time called the 20,000 Homes campaign, and myself at Acre Consulting asked the question, how can we get HIFIS 4 to support the integration and implementation of a quality by name list? All of the features that Adam was just describing, they only came out in version 59, which was in the last few months. So we consulted with a ton of different communities across Canada, as well as other organizations like OrgCode and GeoLens Consulting and Community Solutions down in the United States. And this all came together to create a 41-page report, outlining recommendations for various enhancements. It had dozens and dozens of things. And at the time, we had no idea how ESDC was going to respond. But it's super exciting to see that in version 59, there's a lot of the recommendations that we put together, and a lot of which came from you communities who are on the call today. So what ended up happening with it is Reaching Home released a policy that would support this approach, and then ESDC consulted through the working group and started developing their own prototype designs. And Adam was really instrumental in that whole process. He created a giant list of things that he wanted to see in version 59 and handed that over to the software developers. And so it is a bit of a long process, but it eventually resulted in HIFIS version 59. And this is a list of all the communities that I know of that participated in providing feedback and recommendations for this version. And there's probably even some communities on here that were consulted that I don't know about. So you can see it's a pretty long list. There's 18 communities listed on here from all parts of the country. And so if you see your community's name on here, you can kind of pat yourselves on the back and say, hey, we're contributing. So I know that Adam just went through a bunch of the new features, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but the really key features that I wanted to draw your attention to from the new version of HIFIS with regards to your by name list are, first of all, you can tell whether a client is housed homeless or chronically homeless at a glance, and that didn't used to be possible. In HIFIS, you have a master list of all of the clients you've ever served, but now you can filter to only show the clients who are homeless or say chronically homeless and filter out the clients that you know that you've housed. So that's one of the components from going from your client list to your by name list. The second thing that's really cool is HIFIS 59 also has an automated inactivity policy. So clients will automatically become inactive after a period of time that you get to specify. And so their status will switch from active to inactive. And this also helps change your client list into a by name list by just filtering out all of the people who are inactive. So your client list is every client you've ever served. But out of that, you want to look at just those who are homeless or chronically homeless and just those who are active. So these first two components mean you can take what's in HIFIS and turn it into a by name list with actually very little effort. So if you don't already have a by name list, I suggest that you look into HIFIS because it makes it very easy. Wait, one more, go back.
Sorry.
It's okay. And then Adam also mentioned this, so I'm not going to go into too much detail, but there's also a new coordinated access module that allows you to prioritize your clients or to generate a list to export to Excel. So you can take your by name list that's in HIFIS and look at a lot of the columns that you might want to use to prioritize your clients based on, are they chronically homeless, yes or no? What is their acuity score? Are they Indigenous, et cetera, et cetera. Now you can go to the next slide. Now, this is a new version, and I still like to think of it as being a bit of a work in progress. Adam mentioned that future versions might include a housing match feature, which is very exciting. So one of the things that's really exciting about using HIFIS is it is an active development. That means that it doesn't have 100% of all of the features that I would like to see, but it's getting there. So a few things that are missing right now is you can't add your own prioritization criteria and columns in the coordinated access module. So there are quite a number of data fields that are included when you take your coordinated access list, export it to Excel and try to do some prioritization. But it is possible that you might use locally some prioritization criteria that are not in the coordinated access module. And for example, if you wanted to prioritize people based off of their hair color or their height, those are not columns that you can include, unfortunately. But I think that most of the prioritization criteria your community will use are in the coordinated access module. You may also see some potential issues determining who is chronically homeless. And this is partially because there is a new thing called a housing continuum in HIFIS that has been defined by Reaching Home. What that means is they take all the possible types of housing So for example, you might indicate that your client is living in their vehicle or maybe staying with a friend or family. Those are part of the housing history. Now, Reaching Home has categorized all of those into, are they homeless, are they housed, or are they transitional? And you might find that in your community, you've defined your list slightly differently. So some of these housing types might be counted not the way that you're currently doing it. So you may see a few discrepancies in who's chronically homeless and who isn't for the people who are kind of on the border in your community. Again, there might be some possible discrepancies in the inactivity and activity area. HIFIS only knows about actions or activity that happen in the software. So if you had a phone call with the client and you know that they're still active, but you don't put it in HIFIS, and HIFIS doesn't know that the client's still active. So there may possibly be some variations there as well. And the last thing that I want to draw your attention to is you can't currently automatically pull your outflow and inflow data. There is currently no report that lets you do that. So if you're a Built for Zero community and you need to report monthly move-ins, your inflow and your outflow, then there isn't a report that does that yet, but I know that ESDC is working on a report to support their CHR report, which will include those sorts of data pieces. So just hang in there. If you are a community that does have the capability to pull data out of HIFIS, Marie, you can go on to the next slide, please. You'll find that version 59 does have the building blocks that you need to be able to easily pull that information. There just aren't necessarily reports in place. And if you aren't comfortable pulling data directly from the database, it's not right there for you to be able to get that information. But speaking as someone who does write various reports, the data is stored in such a way that makes it a lot easier. So we're going to be able to see this sort of information, inflow and outflow, and dashboards becoming more and more common for communities using 59, which is very exciting. So this is an example of a report or a part of a report that I'm working on for Built for Zero. It's still a draft, but we're working on having an inflow outflow report that you can pull directly from HIFIS. And I'm very excited about it. And I think that's the end of my slides, Marie. Are you also excited about this?
I am excited. We're really excited about version 59 and the possibilities and things that are upcoming. It really just makes a by name list so much more, and for coordinated access, so much more just immediately available for folks in an easy way. So it is really exciting. So we are going to move on to questions, and I'm going to let folks put those. I'll watch the chat as well as the question function, and I see there are some questions that Ali has started to answer in the chat, which is great. While people are thinking of those questions and putting them in there and we're preparing to answer, I do want to let you know about 2 related upcoming community of practice calls. If you are interested to kind of hear real life, how are communities using this data to end homelessness in their community, there is a community of practice call coming up on February 23rd. And then Ali will also be on a call again where we're kind of calling all HIFIS leads if you want to talk and have a bit of a dialogue together as communities about your plans for implementing 59 and how you go about that and the timing, and talk to your peers across the country. That's what that call is going to be all about. All right, and we also are just going to want your feedback on this webinar. We have 3 quick questions. I'm just going to launch that poll now, so while we're going through questions, people are able to answer that. So I'm just going to launch that now, and then I'm going to go back into our questions. Don't see any open questions right now in our question box, but there's a bit of a dialogue that was happening, asking about the approach to handle clients who come in and out. Are you putting that, on different spreadsheets, that sort of thing? And Ali, I think, answered that well, saying, typically it's one database and you instead, use drop downs to say whether someone's active or inactive, chronic, not chronic, that sort of thing. So you are keeping that all generally in one database. For some communities where that database has gotten quite large, they may choose to create a separate tab and kind of pull out, if they're using Excel, their inactive clients, which then they would go to that list if they were adding someone back in to recognize that they're not newly added to the list, but coming back or returning from inactive. The other question I think as we think about that system level data is it is a bit of a monthly snapshot. So while your by name list is real time and you're trying to keep it up to date in terms of like where people are at and that sort of thing, and you use that for coordinated access, maybe you're case conferencing or meeting together weekly or bi-weekly or once a month, you're keeping that active. But when you go to pull that system data, you are sort of snapshotting it for the month and sort of saying at the end of the month, how many people are currently actively homeless, how many during this month have inflowed out of homelessness or outflowed out of homelessness into housing or into inactive. So yeah, I don't want to have you think it's somehow kind of live in that way for that snapshot. You are sort of snapshotting on a monthly basis. So I have a question here. I'm new to the sector and wondering how I find out if my city community has a by name list and or uses HIFIS. Do individual agencies have access to the community data? So it's a great question. It's going to be a little bit different in every community, but someone would need to be the lead for HIFIS and would have an agreement with the federal government, and Adam might be able to chime in and answer this one as well. And then those communities who are participating and have signed all the consents and confidentiality paperwork would be participating in the system. I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that, Adam.
Yeah, if you go on the Reaching Home website, there's a list of our designated communities with an equivalent contact. So depending on your community, if you are a designated community, you could reach out that way to see if they use HIFIS. In terms of if I were to make the do individuals agencies have access to community data, if I were to sort of turn that into a HIFIS question, that very much depends on how HIFIS is configured within a system. So individual agencies could have access to their community level data based on sort of the governance structure that's put in place around how HIFIS is implemented in a community.
Again, I would say, I would just add to that, if it's Excel, that, you know, the same thing applies. Those who are participating in the system, those who are named on the consent, someone would be managing that by name list and the access that's kind of been agreed upon in your consent forms and with the participating community agencies. Like, the idea though is always that only those who need to see the data see it. But you know, as a community, as you're working collectively to not have people tell their story multiple times and to work together to support people into housing as quickly as possible, then you're sharing, again, with client consent and permission.
Marie, there's a question in the chat. Leslie wants to know about CA consent in HIFIS. Adam, do you want to take that, or?
Sure. So coordinated access consent in HIFIS is different from explicit consent. Coordinated access consent is specific to the coordinated access module, and it's to respect, I mentioned this before, but I'll repeat it. It's to respect communities that have multiple levels of consent, and for a client to appear in the coordinated access module in HIFIS, in the unique identifier list in HIFIS, they will have needed to provide coordinated access consent. So that can be completed at client creation. So there's now a drop-down list that has explicit plus coordinated access consent, so that you don't have to go back into the system and add coordinated access consent later. But you do have that option if, you know, if the client does provide consent to receive housing services, coordinated access consent, at a later time. This is really only relevant if you're a community that has multiple levels of consent. If you use one consent form for everything, then you would just sort of train based on, you create a client, instead of explicit consent, you would now choose explicit plus coordinated access consent, and clients would be automatically, if they meet the criteria, be included in the coordinated access module, then they could be, prioritized as they would be through any sort of coordinated access process.
Great, thanks, Adam. We have another question just about that monthly snapshot and what happens if you realize there was data discrepancies or things that happened that you would need, that would impact that month's data. So I would say definitely communities are often waiting at least till the middle of the month and would have processes in place and kind of understanding in the community about when everyone would have made sure for sure that all of their updated information is in there. Typically what we've recommended to communities, if you find out 3 months later someone was actually housed, is that you record that in the current month, because it can get pretty hard to go back multiple months and rebalance your data. So we suggest that communities handle that sort of in the month that they learn about it. But again, you may set up something different in your system, but that's what we've been recommending. Anything else you see there? Questions?
Can you implement a by name list if you don't have all the key partners on board for moving forward?
I would say, if you waited for everyone to get on board, you might not ever get going. That, if there are folks who are keen or sort of champions of this approach in your community, we always say, start where you are, use what you have, and do what you can. Pull those, folks who are keen together and just start the process, get it started. As people see it working in the community, and as people can just speak to it more specifically from their experience with it, it's an opportunity to bring others on board. So we've certainly seen communities start with just one shelter and starting to collect that data and understand it, and then add in another shelter just to get used to the kinds of data points you're collecting, looking at that data, collecting it on a monthly basis, that sort of thing, practicing to balance that data to make sure it reconciles month to month. Is there somewhere we can find sample Excel templates for those of us not in the HIFIS? Absolutely. So on that by name list page on the Built for Zero website, the toolkit, there is one of the drop downs is that Excel workbook. And so that's a sample workbook that you can further customize as you want. It helps collect all of the sort of necessary basic quality elements. It also has some roll up tabs that help you roll up your data each month and do that snapshot. And there's a guide that goes along with it to explain every part of that spreadsheet. So definitely there's a resource that you can start with and build off of and customize as you need. All right. We super appreciate everyone joining today and those questions, and you may have further questions, and again, you're welcome to reach out. We will be sending out this presentation with all of the links to all of the resources. We just really appreciate you joining today and asking your good questions, and we hope you have a good rest of your day. Thanks again. Thanks, Ali and Adam, for presenting. Bye now, everyone.